Sometimes the people sleeping in the darkest parking lots are the ones praying the hardest for morning. The knock came a little after 2 in the morning. Hannah Carter opened her eyes so fast her neck hurt. For one terrifying second, she forgot where she was. Then she saw the fogged-up windshield, the cracked dashboard glowing faint blue, and the 3 small shapes asleep beside her. Her daughter Lily was curled under an old gray blanket in the back seat with her little brother Noah pressed against her shoulder. 8-year-old Mason slept sitting upright near the window, still wearing his sneakers because Hannah had told him it was easier to leave fast that way. Another knock tapped softly against the glass. Hannah's entire body stiffened. She reached for the door lock even though it was already locked. Outside the SUV, rain dripped under the pale gas station lights. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a long black sedan parked 20 feet away with its headlights off. Hannah lowered her breathing and glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 2:07 a.m. 6 nights. They had survived 6 nights in this car. "Mom," Lily whispered weakly without opening her eyes. "It's okay, baby," Hannah whispered back immediately, even though her pulse was pounding hard enough to hurt. Another knock came, gentler this time. Hannah slowly turned toward the driver's side window. A tall older man stood outside, holding a white paper bag in one hand and an umbrella in the other. He wore a dark coat that looked too expensive for a place like this. His gray hair was wet from the rain, but his expression stayed calm. "Ma'am," he said softly through the glass. "I'm sorry to scare you." Hannah didn't answer. She pulled the blanket higher over Noah's legs. The man glanced toward the children before stepping back slightly, like he didn't want to appear threatening. "Your little ones need something warm to eat," he said. "That's all." Hannah swallowed hard. She hadn't eaten since noon. The kids had shared cold fries and 2 apples hours earlier. Noah had pretended he wasn't hungry after that. She knew he was lying because mothers always knew. "We're fine," she said quietly. The man nodded. "Once, but he didn't leave." "There's chicken soup in the bag," he said. "And hot chocolate." At the words hot chocolate, Mason slowly lifted his head from the back seat. His tired eyes locked onto the paper bag. Hannah felt shame hit her chest so suddenly she almost couldn't breathe. 6 days ago, she had a small apartment in Columbus, Ohio. She had a steady job answering phones at a dental office. Her children slept in real beds with superhero sheets and night lights shaped like stars. Now her son looked at a stranger holding soup like he was looking at Christmas morning. Rain tapped softly across the roof of the SUV. Hannah stared at the man outside her window. "Why are you helping us?" she asked carefully. The older man hesitated for a second. Then he glanced toward the black sedan parked across the lot before looking back at her again. "Because someone asked me to." Hannah followed his eyes toward the dark car, but the windows were tinted too black to see inside. And somehow, that frightened her more than the knock itself. Hannah stared at the black sedan through the rain, trying to see who was sitting behind those dark windows, but all she could make out was her own tired reflection staring back at her. The older man gently placed the paper bag on the hood of the SUV and stepped away from the driver's side door. "You do not have to trust me," he said calmly. "But your children should eat while the soup is still warm." Noah slowly pushed himself upright in the back seat. His blonde hair stuck up in every direction and his cheeks looked pale under the dim parking lot lights. "Mom," he whispered carefully, "I am really hungry." Hannah closed her eyes for a second. That was the problem with children. They could survive almost anything except pretending. She finally cracked the window barely 2 inches. Cold rain-scented air slipped inside immediately. The older man handed her the bag without trying to look into the vehicle. "Thank you," Hannah said quietly, the words almost painful to say. "You are welcome, ma'am." "Who are you?" she asked. "Walter Reed." He gave a small polite nod. "And the man in the car?" Walter hesitated again. "Someone who understands difficult nights." Before Hannah could ask anything else, Walter stepped backward and returned toward the black sedan. A second later, the rear passenger door opened briefly, then closed. The vehicle pulled away silently and disappeared into the wet darkness beyond the gas station. Hannah watched until the taillights vanished completely. Then she opened the bag. The smell nearly broke her heart. Chicken soup, 3 grilled cheese sandwiches, bottled water, hot chocolate in sealed cups. And underneath everything else sat 4 chocolate chip cookies wrapped carefully in napkins. Lily's sleepy eyes widened immediately. "Cookies?" she whispered in disbelief. Hannah forced a smile. "Looks like it." For the first time in days, The inside of the SUV became quiet in a different way. Not scared quiet. Not hungry quiet. Just peaceful for a few minutes. Mason held the soup carefully between his hands like it was something fragile and valuable. Noah smiled after the first sip of hot chocolate, and Hannah realized she had almost forgotten what her youngest son looked like when he smiled. Outside, rain continued falling across the empty highway. Trucks rolled past every few minutes, their headlights flashing across the windshield. Hannah checked the gas gauge again. Less than a quarter tank left. Maybe enough for one more night with the heater running carefully. Maybe not. She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes for a moment. But the memories came immediately anyway. 6 nights earlier, everything had fallen apart before lunchtime. Hannah still remembered standing inside the office manager's doorway while holding her phone against her ear listening to the elementary school nurse explain that Noah had another fever. "I understand your situation," her manager had said without looking up from her computer screen. "But this is the 4th time this month." Hannah had begged for 2 more hours to find childcare. Instead, she walked out carrying a cardboard box with family photos, 2 pens, and the coffee mug Lily painted for her last Christmas. 3 days later came the eviction notice taped to her apartment door. 2 days after that, the motel money ran out. And now, here they were, parked behind a gas station off Interstate 71, surviving night by night inside an aging SUV that smelled faintly like rain and old French fries. Hannah looked at her sleeping children again as they finished the last bites of warm food. Then she looked toward the dark highway where the black sedan had disappeared. Somewhere out there was a stranger who knew they existed. And somehow, that scared her almost as much as being invisible. By sunrise, the rain had stopped, but the cold stayed trapped inside the SUV like it had settled into the seats overnight. Hannah woke up with a stiff neck and reached immediately toward the back seat to check on the children. Lily was still asleep under the gray blanket, while Noah rested against her shoulder, breathing softly. Mason, however, was awake. He sat quietly near the window watching the gas station across the street come back to life as early commuters filled their tanks before work. "You should have slept more," Hannah whispered. Mason shrugged without looking at her. "I wanted to make sure nobody bothered us." The words hit Hannah harder than she expected. 8-year-old boys were supposed to worry about cartoons and soccer practice, not security shifts in parking lots. She forced herself to smile anyway. "You do not have to protect us all by yourself." Mason finally looked at her. "You do it." Hannah turned away before he could see the tears forming in her eyes. Around 8 that morning, she drove carefully across town with the heater turned off to save gas. The fuel light had been glowing since midnight. Every stoplight made her nervous now. Every mile mattered. She parked outside a grocery store and fixed Lily's tangled blonde hair using the rearview mirror while Noah tried to clean ketchup stains from his sweatshirt with a napkin. "Remember the rules," Hannah said softly. The children nodded immediately because they had heard them every day this week. "Stay close to me. Do not ask for anything. Do not tell anyone we sleep in the car," Mason finished quietly. Hannah hated those rules more every time she heard them out loud. Inside the grocery store, warmth wrapped around them instantly. Noah drifted toward the bakery section the way hungry children always did. Hannah checked her wallet again while pretending not to. $11.43. That had to last for gas, food, and somehow another night. Lily suddenly tugged on Hannah's sleeve near the cereal aisle. "Mom," she whispered carefully. "That man is here again." Hannah's stomach tightened immediately. She turned slowly and spotted Walter Reed standing near the produce section in the same dark coat from the night before. He was not shopping. He simply stood there holding a small basket with coffee and bananas while calmly pretending to study apples. When their eyes met, Walter gave a polite nod but did not approach. Hannah quickly guided the children into another aisle. Her heart pounded harder with every step. "Why is he following us?" Mason whispered. "I do not know," Hannah answered honestly. But deep down, she knew something about this situation did not feel random anymore. 10 minutes later, Hannah stood at the checkout lane calculating every item in her cart before placing it on the conveyor belt. Bread, peanut butter, bananas, crackers, cheap juice boxes. The cashier scanned everything while Hannah mentally counted dollars. Then came the total, $23.16. Hannah felt heat crawl into her face instantly. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I need to put some things back." Noah quietly returned the crackers first without being asked. Lily put back the juice boxes. Hannah swallowed hard and handed over the remaining groceries. The cashier nodded kindly, but the humiliation still burned deep inside her chest. Then a calm voice spoke behind her. Add the rest back. Hannah turned immediately. Walter stood there holding a black credit card between his fingers. No, Hannah said quickly. Absolutely not. Walter did not argue. He simply looked toward the children standing silently beside her. Ma'am, he said gently. Sometimes accepting help is how people survive long enough to stand again. Hannah gripped the shopping cart tighter as people moved around them with overflowing groceries and casual conversations about weekend plans. Nobody else in the store seemed to notice the moment her entire dignity balanced on whether she accepted help from a stranger. Walter stood patiently beside the checkout lane without pressuring her. The cashier glanced awkwardly between them before quietly stopping the scanner. Lily looked down at the floor, while Noah stared longingly at the crackers he had already returned to the shelf. Mason stepped closer to his mother protectively, like he thought he might need to defend her from embarrassment itself. We cannot pay you back, Hannah said carefully. Walter gave a small nod. I understand. Then why are you doing this? Walter looked toward the children again before answering. Because someone once helped me when I needed it. Hannah studied his face for signs of manipulation or pity, but she found neither. Somehow that made this harder. Pity she could reject. Kindness was more dangerous because it weakened the walls she had spent 6 nights building around herself. Finally, she looked toward Noah, whose eyes remained fixed on the crackers. Hannah closed her eyes briefly. Just this once, she whispered. Walter handed his card to the cashier without another word. The children stayed silent as the rest of the groceries were scanned, but Hannah noticed the relief on their faces immediately. Relief had become rare enough to recognize instantly now. Outside the grocery store, cold wind swept across the parking lot, while dark clouds gathered again overhead. Hannah loaded the grocery bags carefully into the SUV while Walter stood nearby, holding an umbrella over Lily and Noah. Thank you, Hannah said quietly once the trunk was closed. You already thanked me last night. That does not explain any of this. Walter slipped his hands into his coat pockets. Some people notice suffering because they have lived through it themselves. Hannah frowned slightly. The man in the car? Walter did not answer directly. He knows what it feels like to lose a home. Before Hannah could ask another question, a black SUV rolled slowly through the parking lot nearby. Tinted windows. Expensive tires. The same vehicle from the gas station. Hannah recognized it immediately. The rear passenger window lowered only an inch before stopping. She could not see the face inside clearly, only the outline of a man seated in the shadows. For a brief second, she felt eyes on her. Calm, observing, not threatening. Somehow that unsettled her even more. Then the window rolled back up, and the SUV drove away without a sound. Who is he? Hannah asked quietly. Walter watched the vehicle disappear before answering. A man who does not forget where he came from. Then he handed Hannah a small folded piece of paper. There is an address on that card. A church on the north side of town. They serve hot meals tonight and allow families to stay indoors during storms. Hannah looked down at the paper in her hand. Why are you helping us this much? Walter smiled sadly. Because children should not have to learn survival before they learn childhood. Those words stayed with Hannah long after Walter left. By evening, heavy rain hammered against the city again as Hannah drove slowly toward the church address. The roads blurred beneath streaks of water while windshield wipers struggled to keep up. Noah had fallen asleep in the back seat, clutching the box of crackers against his chest. Lily quietly colored on the back of an old receipt with a broken crayon while Mason stared out the window. Mom, he said softly after several minutes. Do you think that man is rich? Hannah glanced at him through the mirror. Why? Mason shrugged. Because only rich people drive cars like that. Hannah tightened her grip on the steering wheel. Somewhere ahead of them, hidden behind dark windows and silence, was a stranger who kept appearing exactly when her family was falling apart. And deep down, she could not decide if that was a miracle or something she should fear. The church basement smelled like coffee, soup, and wet jackets drying from the storm outside. Folding tables filled the room, while volunteers moved quietly between families carrying trays of food and blankets. Hannah had not expected so many people to be there. Elderly couples, single fathers, mothers holding sleeping babies, Teenagers pretending not to look embarrassed. Poverty looked different on everyone, but exhaustion always looked the same. Hannah sat with the children near the corner wall while Noah eagerly finished his second bowl of chicken noodle soup. Lily colored carefully on scraps of paper a volunteer had handed her, and Mason stayed close beside Hannah, his eyes constantly scanning the room. "You can relax a little," Hannah whispered gently. Mason shook his head. "What if they tell us to leave?" Hannah looked around the warm basement with its humming heaters and trays of donated food. For one night, nobody was asking them to leave. And somehow, that made her chest ache worse than sleeping in the SUV. A woman from the church approached carrying folded towels. "There are showers down the hall if your children want warm water tonight," she said kindly. Hannah almost cried right there at the table. "Thank you," she whispered instead. 30 minutes later, Noah emerged from the shower room, wearing clean donated pajamas that were slightly too big for him. He grinned for the first time all week. "Mom," he said excitedly, "they had real shampoo." Hannah laughed softly before she could stop herself. The sound surprised her. It had been days since she heard herself laugh. Across the room, an older television mounted high in the corner played muted news coverage while people quietly ate dinner below it. Hannah barely noticed until Mason suddenly tugged her sleeve. "Mom," he whispered. "That is him." Hannah turned toward the television screen. A reporter stood outside a downtown hotel speaking beside a tall man in a dark navy coat, surrounded by cameras. Even from a distance, Hannah recognized him immediately. The same posture, the same quiet stillness she had felt through the tinted SUV window. Sebastian Hale announced another expansion project this afternoon. The caption beneath the screen read, "The billionaire investor continues to rank among the wealthiest business leaders in Ohio." Hannah stared at the screen in disbelief. Billionaire. The word alone felt unreal compared to the life she was living now. Sebastian Hale answered reporters calmly before entering the hotel, surrounded by security and flashing cameras. He looked polished, composed, untouchable, like someone from another universe entirely. Yet somehow, that same man had been sitting quietly in a dark SUV outside a gas station, watching over her children while they slept. "Why would somebody like that care about us?" Hannah whispered without meaning to. Nobody answered because nobody could. Late that evening, volunteers began preparing sleeping areas across the basement floor using cots and blankets. The storm outside had grown worse, thunder shaking the windows every few minutes. Lily and Noah fell asleep quickly, exhausted from finally feeling safe indoors. Mason stayed awake beside Hannah under the dim lights while rain hammered against the church roof overhead. "Mom," he whispered quietly, "do you think rich people ever get scared?" Hannah thought about Sebastian Hale sitting silently behind dark windows. "I think everybody gets scared," she answered softly. "Some people just hide it better." Mason nodded thoughtfully before finally drifting asleep beside her. Hannah leaned back against the wall and closed her tired eyes for a moment. But sleep never fully came. Because somewhere out there, one of the richest men in the state knew her name, knew where her children slept, and kept appearing whenever her family reached another breaking point. And no matter how kind his help seemed, Hannah could not shake the feeling that this story had started long before that first knock on her car window. Hannah barely slept that night. Every time thunder rattled the church windows, she opened her eyes and checked on the children stretched across the small cots beside her. Noah slept curled tightly under two blankets while Lily held her crayons against her chest, even in her sleep. Mason stayed closest to Hannah, one hand gripping the sleeve of her sweater like he was afraid she might disappear before morning. Around 6 o'clock, volunteers began serving coffee and oatmeal near the folding tables. The storm had passed, but cold gray clouds still hung low over the city outside. Hannah quietly slipped on her shoes and walked toward the hallway to wash her face before the children woke up. She stared at herself in the bathroom mirror for a long moment. Tired eyes, pale skin, hair pulled back carelessly. She looked older than 32 now. Survival aged people quickly. When she returned to the basement, panic hit her instantly. Mason was gone. Hannah dropped her bag onto the floor and spun around quickly, searching between the rows of cots. "Lily," she whispered sharply, "where is your brother?" Lily sat upright immediately, confused and frightened. Noah rubbed his eyes sleepily. "I thought he was with you," Lily answered. Hannah's heartbeat exploded into panic. She rushed across the basement checking corners, tables, and hallways. "Mason, Her voice shook harder each time she called his name. Volunteers began helping search, while families looked up from breakfast quietly. Hannah ran toward the church entrance and pushed outside into the freezing morning air. Cars passed steadily along the wet street, while pedestrians hurried beneath coats and umbrellas. But Mason was nowhere. "Please," Hannah whispered under her breath as she scanned the sidewalks desperately. "Please, not my son." Then she saw the black SUV parked across the street. Her stomach dropped instantly. Before she could even think, she crossed the road toward it. The passenger door opened, and Walter Reed stepped out quickly. "Where's my son?" Hannah demanded, panic cracking through every word. Walter looked genuinely startled. "Your son? He is gone." Her voice broke completely now. "He disappeared." For the first time since meeting him, Walter lost his calm expression. He immediately turned toward the SUV and opened the rear door. A tall man stepped out slowly onto the sidewalk wearing a charcoal coat and dark gloves. Sebastian Hale. Up close, he looked younger than Hannah expected, maybe early 40s, with tired eyes that did not match the expensive clothes or polished appearance the television cameras showed. He looked directly at Hannah, and somehow his voice stayed calm even while hers shook apart. "How long has he been missing?" "I do not know," she answered breathlessly. "Maybe 10 minutes. Sebastian immediately looked toward Walter. "Check the nearby blocks and the bus station." Walter nodded and hurried away. Sebastian turned back toward Hannah. "Tell me about your son." 8 years old. Blonde. Hair. Blue jacket. Hannah struggled to breathe evenly. "He does not like loud places. Sometimes when he gets scared, he hides instead of asking for help." Sebastian listened carefully without interrupting. Then his expression changed slightly, almost like recognition. "There is a playground half a mile from here," he said quietly. "Children go there when they want to feel normal." Hannah followed him quickly through the cold streets while fear twisted tighter inside her chest with every second. "How do you know that?" she asked shakily. Sebastian kept walking beside her. "Because when I was 9 years old," he said softly, "my mother and I lived in our car for almost a year. And every morning, I used to hide at the same playground pretending I belonged somewhere." Hannah stared at him in stunned silence. For the first time, the billionaire no longer felt like a mystery behind tinted windows. He felt human, and somehow, that scared her even more. The playground sat behind an old elementary school surrounded by wet maple trees and empty picnic tables still covered in rainwater from the storm. Hannah spotted Mason immediately. He sat alone at the end of a swing set with his hood pulled over his head, slowly dragging his sneakers across the gravel beneath him. Relief hit her so hard her knees nearly gave out. "Mason," she whispered before rushing toward him. The little boy looked up quickly, startled by the fear in her voice. Hannah wrapped her arms around him tightly, without caring who saw her cry. "Do not ever do that again," she whispered shakily against his hair. "I thought something happened to you." Mason hugged her back immediately. "I am sorry, Mom." His voice sounded small and guilty. "I just wanted to think for a little while." Hannah pulled back enough to look at his face. "You cannot disappear like that." Mason stared down at his shoes. "I heard people talking at the church." Hannah's chest tightened. "Talking about what?" "About us." He swallowed hard before continuing. "One man said families like ours usually stay homeless for a long time." The words landed like stones inside Hannah's heart because children always heard the things adults thought they were hiding. "So I came here," Mason whispered. "I wanted to pretend we still had normal mornings." Hannah sat beside him on the damp swing without caring about the cold water soaking into her jeans. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved softly through the empty playground while traffic hummed somewhere far beyond the trees. Then Sebastian Hale slowly approached from a distance, giving them space like he understood fragile moments should never be rushed. Mason looked up at him carefully. "Are you really rich?" The question caught Hannah completely off guard. "Mason," she whispered, embarrassed. But Sebastian only smiled faintly. "Yes," he answered honestly. Mason frowned slightly. "Then why are you here?" Sebastian looked around the quiet playground before sitting on the bench nearby. "Because money does not erase certain memories," he said softly. Hannah watched him carefully now. There was no arrogance in his voice. No performance. Just exhaustion hidden beneath calm control. Sebastian folded his hands together loosely. "When I was your age, my mother and I slept in a broken station wagon behind a grocery store in Cleveland." Mason's eyes widened slightly. "Really?" Sebastian nodded once. Every morning before school, I would come to playgrounds like this because I wanted to feel like a regular kid for a few minutes. Hannah studied him silently. It was difficult to connect this man with the billionaire she saw on television, surrounded by cameras and polished suits. "What happened to your dad?" Mason asked carefully. Sebastian looked away toward the empty swings moving gently in the wind. "He left when I was very young." "Mine too," Mason said quietly. Sebastian nodded like he understood that pain without needing details. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. A folded photograph. He handed it toward Mason. The picture showed a thin teenage boy sitting beside an older woman inside an old car, both smiling despite obvious exhaustion. Sebastian looked almost unrecognizable without the expensive clothes and polished image. "That was us," he said quietly. Mason stared at the picture in disbelief before handing it back. "Carefully. You do not look rich there." Sebastian gave a soft laugh. "We were not." Hannah felt something inside her walls begin to crack for the first time since all of this started. Because suddenly Sebastian Hale no longer felt like a mysterious billionaire observing their suffering from a distance. He felt like someone who had survived the same darkness and never fully escaped it. Then Sebastian looked directly at Hannah for the first time that morning. "You and your children should not be living in that SUV anymore," he said gently. "Let me help you." Hannah stared at Sebastian for several long seconds while cold wind drifted across the empty playground. Mason sat quietly beside her, watching both adults carefully like he understood this moment mattered more than most conversations children overheard. Sebastian remained calm, his hands resting loosely inside the pockets of his coat. He did not look impatient or offended by her silence. Somehow that only made the offer harder to process. "I cannot accept charity," Hannah finally said quietly. Sebastian nodded once as if he had expected that answer. "I am not offering charity." Hannah let out a tired breath. "Then what are you offering?" "A temporary apartment for your family, a safe place to sleep, and a job interview at one of my foundation offices." Hannah shook her head almost immediately. "People like me do not get opportunities from people like you without strings attached." Sebastian's expression changed slightly at those words, not angry exactly, just sad in a way she did not expect. "You think I want something from you?" Hannah looked away toward the empty swings. "I think nobody helps strangers this much unless there is a reason." For a moment, Sebastian said nothing at all. Then he slowly sat beside her on the damp bench, keeping enough distance to avoid making her uncomfortable. "When I was 11 years old," he said quietly, "my mother got pneumonia during winter while we were living in our car." Hannah glanced toward him despite herself. Sebastian kept his eyes on the playground ahead. "She tried to hide how sick she was because she did not want me to panic. But one night she collapsed in a grocery store parking lot." His voice remained calm, but Hannah could hear something deeper underneath it now. "Most people walked past us like we were invisible." He swallowed once before continuing. Then a woman stopped. "She bought medicine, blankets, food. She paid for a motel room for 3 nights." Hannah listened silently while Mason leaned closer beside her. "That woman told my mother something I never forgot," Sebastian continued softly. "She said difficult seasons are not permanent unless people stop helping each other survive them." Hannah felt her chest tighten unexpectedly. "Who was she?" Sebastian smiled faintly, but there was sadness behind it. "We never saw her again." Wind moved through the trees above them, while traffic echoed somewhere beyond the schoolyard. For the first time since meeting him, Hannah understood something important. Sebastian was not helping her because he pitied her. He was helping because somebody once saved his family when the world decided they were invisible. "I still cannot just take everything from you," Hannah whispered. Sebastian nodded slowly. "Then do not." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a simple white business card. No gold lettering, no flashy design, just his name, a phone number, and an office address downtown. "Come to the office tomorrow morning," he said. "Interview for the administrative assistant position. You have office experience. The job is real." Hannah looked down at the card in her hand. "And the apartment?" "Temporary housing for employees in crisis situations," Sebastian answered calmly. "You would earn it." Hannah wanted to refuse again. Pride told her to refuse. Fear told her to refuse. But then she looked at Mason beside her wearing damp sneakers and a jacket too thin for Ohio weather. She thought about Noah sleeping in the SUV with hunger headaches and Lily pretending not to notice when adults looked at them with pity. Survival did not leave much room for pride anymore. Before Hannah could answer, her phone suddenly rang inside her pocket. She pulled it out quickly and saw the church volunteer number flashing across the screen. "Hello," she answered immediately. The woman on the other end sounded worried. "Hannah, I am sorry to bother you, but Noah is running a fever again. I think you should come back right away." Hannah rushed back to the church with Mason beside her while Sebastian drove them through downtown streets slick with rainwater. The inside of the SUV stayed quiet except for the sound of windshield wipers moving steadily across the glass. Hannah held her phone tightly in both hands the entire drive, her mind racing through every terrible possibility mothers imagine whenever their child gets sick. "He has been coughing all morning," the church volunteer had explained before hanging up. "And now he feels very warm." Hannah blamed herself immediately. Too many cold nights. Too little food. Too much fear packed into a small, growing body. The church basement doors opened before they even reached them. Lily stood near the entrance wrapped in a donated blanket, while a volunteer held Noah against her shoulder. His cheeks looked flushed and exhausted. "Mom," Lily whispered shakily as Hannah hurried inside. Hannah immediately pressed her hand against Noah's forehead. The heat frightened her instantly. "We should take him to urgent care," the volunteer said gently. Hannah's stomach dropped. She already knew she could not afford that. Sebastian stepped beside her calmly. "Walter already called ahead," he said quietly. "There is a pediatric clinic expecting us." Hannah looked up sharply. "I cannot pay for emergency treatment." "Then do not worry about that right now," Sebastian answered softly. Noah stirred weakly against Hannah's shoulder while thunder rolled faintly outside again. 30 minutes later, Hannah sat beside Noah in a small examination room while a pediatric nurse checked his temperature and listened to his breathing. Mason and Lily sat nearby holding cups of apple juice from the waiting room. Sebastian remained outside in the hallway, giving the family privacy without needing to be asked. The doctor finally smiled reassuringly after the examination. "It looks like a respiratory infection made worse by exhaustion and cold exposure," she explained gently. "But we caught it early." Hannah nearly cried from relief alone. After medicine instructions and paperwork were finished, Hannah stepped quietly into the hallway where Sebastian stood near the windows overlooking the parking lot below. He looked strangely out of place in the small clinic wearing an expensive coat beside faded children's coloring books and outdated magazines. Yet somehow he also looked more comfortable there than at any television press conference she had seen. "He is going to be okay," Hannah whispered. Sebastian nodded softly. "Good." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Hannah looked down at the white business card still folded tightly in her hand. "You really mean the job offer?" she asked quietly. "Yes." Even after seeing all of this, Sebastian glanced toward the exam room where the children waited. Especially after seeing all of this, Hannah let out a shaky breath she felt like she had been holding for 6 straight nights. "I do not want my children growing up learning how to survive parking lots." Sebastian's expression softened slightly. "Then let us help them learn something better." The words settled deep inside her chest. Not pity, not rescue, a chance. By evening, Walter drove them to a small furnished apartment owned by Sebastian's foundation on the north side of the city. It was not luxurious, just clean walls, warm lights, real beds, and a refrigerator stocked with groceries. But to Hannah, it felt impossible. Noah fell asleep almost immediately on the couch beneath a blanket, while Lily wandered from room to room staring at everything in amazement. Mason stood quietly beside the bedroom doorway before looking up at Hannah carefully. "Mom." "Yeah, baby. Are we hiding tonight?" Hannah looked around the apartment slowly. At the warm kitchen light glowing softly above the counter. At the clean blankets folded neatly on real beds. At her children finally looking safe again. Then she pulled Mason gently against her side and kissed the top of his head. "No," she whispered with tears filling her eyes. "We are finally home."